It was supposed to be a routine Senate hearing on election integrity, dry, procedural, and largely forgettable. But things took a turn the moment Senator Tim Scott walked into the chamber with a fiery glare and a stack of notes clutched in his hand. Representative Jasmine Crockett, already seated at the witness table, glanced up and raised an eyebrow. She had a reputation for sharp comebacks and unshakable confidence, especially when it came to defending civil rights and voting protections. Tim Scott, on the other hand, had made headlines for challenging his own party and taking bold, sometimes controversial, stances. From the outset, Scott didn't hold back. "We're tired of this political theater," he snapped, pointing toward the row of representatives. "Tired of people pretending to care about the Constitution while undermining it at every turn." Cameras flashed. A buzz ran through the chamber. Crockett leaned forward slightly, arms calmly crossed. "Are you suggesting that defending the right to vote is political theater, Senator?" Scott didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting that some of the loudest voices in this room are more interested in being viral clips than actual legislators." A low "ooh" rose from the staffers in the back. Crockett smiled slowly, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind that meant she was about to deliver a verbal slap powerful enough to echo across social media. "Senator," she said smoothly, "I'd rather go viral for defending democracy than stay silent while it's being chipped away behind closed doors." The room fell quiet. Scott opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett wasn't done. Senator Scott blinked, clearly caught off guard by Crockett's calm but cutting remark. He attempted to pivot, flipping through his notes with exaggerated purpose. "We're talking about facts," he said sternly. "Not feelings. Not dramatics. The American people deserve truth, not theatrics designed for retweets." Crockett leaned in slightly, her voice steady and cool. "Then let's talk facts, Senator. You brought up the Constitution, so let's start there." She reached under the table and pulled out her own well-worn copy. With a quick flip, she found her place and held it up. "This document right here guarantees equal protection and voting rights. Yet when laws are passed that shorten voting hours, reduce polling locations in black communities, or restrict mail-in ballots without justification, you call it integrity? No, Senator. That's not integrity. That's suppression, dressed up in a suit and tie." The room stirred again, staffers looked at each other, some scribbling notes, others reaching for their phones. The hearing wasn't even half over, and it was already making waves. Scott tried to regain control. "No one here is trying to suppress voters. We're talking about making sure elections are secure." Crockett didn't even blink. "You mean secure from the voters you don't agree with?" Silence. The tension in the chamber was thick enough to slice through. "I took an oath to serve the people," Crockett continued. "Not just the ones who vote for me, but the ones who've been ignored for decades. So if calling that out is going viral, so be it." Scott's face tightened. His usual confidence now gave way to visible frustration. "And Jasmine Crockett?" She sat back in her chair, calm, composed, and clearly in command of the moment. The tension was now a living thing in the hearing room. Reporters scribbled furiously. C-SPAN's live feed viewer count was climbing by the second. Even members of the committee leaned forward, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Senator Scott wasn't one to retreat, especially not on national television. He straightened his tie and launched back in. "You speak of ignoring voters," he said, voice rising slightly. "But let's be honest, your side has turned voting into a political weapon. Fearmongering, division, identity politics. You claim to protect democracy, but you're just using it for power." Crockett's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "Power?" she repeated, slowly. "Senator, you think defending access to the ballot box is about power?" "No, sir. It's about principle. And if defending working families, students, veterans, and seniors from being purged off voter rolls offends you, then maybe the problem isn't with me. A few audible gasps fluttered through the audience. Scott tried to interrupt, but Crockett didn't let him. "You stand there and accuse others of division," she continued, her voice rising now, strong and unwavering. "But where was that concern when voter ID laws conveniently excluded entire groups? When early voting was slashed in neighborhoods that look like mine? Where was your outrage then?" Scott's jaw clenched, but the crowd could feel the momentum shifting. Crockett wasn't just responding, she was commanding the room. "This isn't about left or right," she said, pointing toward the gallery. "This is about right and wrong. And if telling the truth in this chamber makes me a target, I'm not backing down. Not today. Not ever." A quiet beat passed. Then someone in the back clapped. One clap turned into several. The chairman banged the gavel. "Order." But it was too late. Jasmine Crockett had seized the moment, and everyone in that room knew it. As the gavel echoed through the chamber, the chairman leaned into his mic. "Let's maintain decorum, please," he said sternly, though even he couldn't hide the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Senator Scott shifted in his seat, clearly rattled. He was known for his composure, but this was different. He had walked in to dominate the conversation. Now, he was trying to salvage it. He cleared his throat and attempted to redirect. "Representative Crockett," he began, "no one is questioning your commitment. But the tone you've taken today, it doesn't reflect the bipartisan spirit this committee was built on." Crockett gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You're right, Senator. Bipartisanship should be the goal. But let's not pretend that tone is the issue when substance is being ignored." She leaned forward again, her tone measured but piercing. "You talk about unity while pushing policies that silence the most vulnerable. You demand civility while standing silent as voting rights are stripped away, district by district." Scott opened his mouth, but Crockett was already on the offensive. "If bipartisanship means staying quiet while millions are disenfranchised, then I'll pass. Because unity without justice isn't unity. It's complicity." The words hit hard. Harder than Scott expected. Even some of his own party members glanced away, uncomfortable with the sudden clarity being broadcast live across the country. Crockett's voice dropped just slightly. "I didn't come here to play safe politics. I came here to speak for the people who never get a seat at this table." The hearing room was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Tim Scott sat motionless. Jasmine Crockett slowly pushed back her microphone and folded her hands. And just like that, she had turned the entire hearing into a masterclass. The silence in the hearing room spoke louder than any speech. Even the staffers, usually busy multitasking behind their laptops, had frozen in place. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath. Senator Scott adjusted his chair and let out a slow exhale. "Representative Crockett," he said, voice lower now, "you've made your point. Passionately. But passion doesn't always equal policy. What we need is actual reform, substance, not sound bites." Crockett tilted her head, amused. "Substance? I've co-authored 3 bills to expand voter access this session alone. How many of those have you even read?" Scott tried to wave it off. "We're not here to trade jabs, you started it," Crockett cut in, calm but deadly. "You came at me with accusations. I responded with receipts." The gallery shifted again, murmurs rising. This wasn't just a clapback anymore, this was a surgical takedown. And Crockett wasn't improvising. She had come prepared for war in a room full of suits playing chess. She reached into her folder and pulled out a printed chart. "Here's a list of states that closed polling locations disproportionately in communities of color. Here's the data on wait times. And here's the kicker, your own voting record aligned with those efforts 87% of the time." Scott's face hardened. "This is political theater," he muttered. "No," Crockett said sharply. "This is accountability." Cameras zoomed in. Phones lit up across the chamber. One political reporter tweeted, "Breaking, Crockett dismantles Scott with live voting rights data." This just became the moment of the hearing. Scott tried to speak again, but the chairman raised a hand. "I think we've heard enough for now." But everyone knew what really happened. Tim Scott tried to corner Jasmine Crockett. And she turned it into a masterclass in public humiliation, armed with facts, fearlessness, and fire. By the time the hearing ended, the story had already gone viral. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's takedown flooded social media. News outlets scrambled to re-edit their headlines. Pundits across networks, from MSNBC to even skeptical anchors at Fox, acknowledged the political earthquake that had just rocked the Capitol. Crockett stuns Scott with live data smackdown on voting rights. Senator tries to school representative, gets schooled instead. Jasmine Crockett just became a political powerhouse overnight. Meanwhile, back in the hallway outside the chamber, reporters swarmed. "Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe Senator Scott intentionally misrepresented the data? Do you think this exchange will impact bipartisan negotiations? Was this personal?" Jasmine paused at the mic, calm and composed, just like she was during the hearing. "This isn't about personal attacks," she said clearly. "This is about the people who are tired of being talked about instead of being talked to. I didn't come here to play politics. I came to fight for the right to vote, for everyone. If that makes some folks uncomfortable, maybe it's time they ask why." As she turned to walk away, one reporter shouted, "Do you regret going so hard on Senator Scott?" She stopped, looked over her shoulder, and smiled. "I didn't go hard," she said. "I told the truth. And the truth just happens to hit hard." Inside, Senator Scott was being ushered into a private room by his staff. He was visibly agitated, waving off questions and phone calls. His carefully crafted narrative had unraveled in real time, broadcast to millions. And Jasmine Crockett? She had just stepped into a national spotlight few ever command, and she owned it like she was born there. Inside a closed-door meeting room just down the hall from the hearing chamber, Senator Tim Scott's aides were in full crisis mode. Social media's exploding, one aide whispered, holding up her phone. "Crockett's name is trending above the presidential frontrunners." Another staffer added, "Your base is split. Some are defending you, but others are saying you walked right into it." Scott paced the room, jaw clenched. "I didn't come here to get into a war of words with a House rep," he snapped. This was supposed to be about policy. One of his senior advisors approached, voice low but firm. "With respect, Senator. Crockett is policy now." That exchange didn't just go viral, it defined the hearing. Scott dropped into a chair and buried his face in his hands for a moment. Meanwhile, across the Capitol, Representative Jasmine Crockett had returned to her office, where the energy was electric. Staffers clapped when she walked in. "You just shut the whole building down," one aide grinned. Jasmine gave a small laugh, shaking her head. "I didn't expect it to go like that." "You didn't plan that?" another asked. "Oh, I planned to speak truth," she replied. "I didn't plan to have to carry the entire hearing on my back." Her phone buzzed. A text from a well-known civil rights leader. That wasn't a clapback. That was history. Within minutes, her team had drafted a follow-up post for social media, a simple, classy statement thanking viewers for their support and reiterating her commitment to voting rights. No gloating. No hashtags. Just strength. But behind the scenes, something bigger had shifted. Tim Scott's team was scrambling to reframe the narrative. Jasmine Crockett's team was preparing for the next level. And Washington? Washington was watching closely. Later that evening, cable news lit up with wall-to-wall coverage of the Senate showdown. Pundits debated whether this was a PR disaster for Tim Scott, or a breakout moment for Jasmine Crockett. On one panel, a conservative strategist tried to spin it. "Look, Senator Scott was trying to have a policy-driven conversation. Crockett turned it into a performance." But the liberal analyst on the other side fired back, "Performance? That was precision." She didn't just clap back, she dismantled him with facts, poise, and calm fire. That wasn't theater. That was leadership. Online, things were even more intense. Memes flooded X and Instagram, photos of Scott frozen mid-sentence captioned, "When you realize she brought receipts." Clips of Crockett's quote, "Unity without justice is complicity," turned into TikTok soundbites and reel remixes. Even celebrities weighed in. A-list actors, authors, and athletes reposted the moment with comments like, "Put some respect on her name. She didn't miss once. That's how you defend democracy." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett sat in a quiet corner of her DC apartment, her phone buzzing non-stop. Texts. Emails. Requests for interviews. Campaign donors offering to boost her next run. But she wasn't chasing any of that. Not yet. She was reviewing bills. Making notes. Preparing for the next battle. Because this wasn't about viral fame for her. It was about building power, the kind that lasts beyond a single clip. Across town, Tim Scott sat in his hotel room, watching the coverage silently. His advisors had already crafted a statement. Something safe, diplomatic, forgettable. But he knew, deep down, that Jasmine Crockett had changed the game. And she hadn't even raised her voice. The next morning, the Capitol was buzzing. Senators and representatives alike whispered in corridors, exchanging glances as they passed Jasmine Crockett in the halls. She didn't walk, she glided. Calm. Confident. Controlled. As if the weight of the previous day's storm only made her more focused. Several colleagues, even from the other side of the aisle, offered subtle nods of respect. One senior Republican, known for never engaging in theatrics, leaned over quietly and said, "Didn't agree with you. But you held your ground. Impressive." Meanwhile, the press was circling like hawks. "Congresswoman, do you feel this moment has shifted your political future? Would you consider a Senate run after this? Any comment on Senator Scott's silence today?" Crockett offered a short reply, "I'll let the work speak for itself," then turned and disappeared into a committee room. But the tremors were still shaking DC. Tim Scott had cancelled his morning interviews. His office released a short statement praising robust debate and calling for unity on shared values, but it read like a retreat. A desperate attempt to soften the blow without admitting defeat. In political circles, the verdict was already in. Scott's attempt to discredit Crockett had backfired spectacularly. What was meant to be a power move became a public unraveling, an unforced error that gave Crockett a national platform, and she had wielded it with surgical precision. At a midday strategy lunch, senior Democratic leaders took note. "She's not just fire," one senator said. "She's discipline." She embarrassed a senior Republican on a national stage, without a single insult. "That's rare." "She's next," another whispered. "Mark my words." And Crockett? She wasn't celebrating. She was preparing. The spotlight had found her, but she was already steps ahead of it. By the end of the week, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a trending name, she was a movement. Cable networks requested exclusive sit-downs. Editorial boards praised her composure. Grassroots organizers across the country began circulating clips of her exchange with Scott as a rallying cry for voter rights advocacy. One prominent commentator declared on national TV, "What Crockett did wasn't just a moment, it was a message. A warning shot to those who think they can speak over, around, or through women of color in politics. That era is done." Crockett, meanwhile, remained grounded. She accepted a few interviews, always redirecting the conversation back to policy. "This was never about embarrassing anyone," she said in one primetime spot. "It was about defending democracy. If that truth stings, maybe it's because it hit where it needed to." While Crockett soared, Scott's momentum flatlined. He attempted to reframe the hearing in a weekend op-ed, claiming, "A spirited exchange is healthy for democracy." But no matter how carefully he worded it, the damage was done. He had walked into the chamber expecting to control the conversation, and walked out as a cautionary tale. Even behind the scenes, Republican strategists were panicking. She just became a fundraising machine, one admitted. And worse, she did it without yelling, cursing, or breaking a sweat. A viral poll asked, who best represented the American people in this hearing? Crockett, 82%. Scott, 9%. Neither, 9%. The message was clear. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about presence. And Crockett had just demonstrated hers on a level few ever reach. As the Capitol lights dimmed that evening, Crockett stood alone at her office window, overlooking the city. Her phone buzzed again, another request, another opportunity. She glanced at it, smiled faintly, and set it down. This wasn't the end of something. It was only the beginning. Monday morning. The buzz had not faded, it had grown louder. What began as a heated exchange between two lawmakers had evolved into something far greater, a shift in the political tide. Jasmine Crockett arrived at the Capitol to find a letter waiting on her desk. It wasn't from a donor or a fellow politician. It was handwritten, mailed in from Georgia, from an elderly black woman named Mrs. Hattie Green. It read, "Dear Congresswoman, I've watched politics my whole life, and I've never seen someone speak like you did, with truth, fire, and grace. I waited 6 hours in line to vote last election. When I saw you speak, I knew my voice wasn't wasted. You gave it power. Thank you." Crockett read it twice. Then folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer beside her oath of office. Elsewhere, Tim Scott sat with his comms team. The message was clear: avoid further direct engagement with Crockett. Don't mention her name in interviews. Pivot. Deflect. Survive. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than spin. Across the country, progressive organizers had already turned the hearing into a rallying cry. Fundraising surged. Volunteer sign-ups doubled. Crockett's inbox filled with invitations, from universities, civil rights groups, even international forums on democracy. But Crockett didn't let it distract her. That afternoon, she took the floor again, this time to introduce a new bill expanding early voting protections in underrepresented districts. There were no viral moments. No shouting. No grandstanding. Just work. Focused. Relentless. Unapologetic. As she finished her remarks, a few scattered claps echoed in the chamber. She didn't need applause. She wasn't chasing attention. She was building something. And everyone knew it. From the stunned silence of a Senate hearing room. To a voice that cut through spin like a scalpel. To a movement now gaining momentum nationwide. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate. She left a mark. And Washington would never underestimate her again. A week had passed since the Capitol clash, but the ripple effects were only growing. Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium of a packed town hall in her district. What was supposed to be a routine Q&A turned into a standing room-only event. Not because of a viral moment, but because people were hungry for something real. Mothers. Veterans. Students. Retirees. All there for one reason: she made them feel seen. "No one's going to hand us progress," Crockett said to the crowd. "We have to claim it. Every vote. Every voice. Every seat at the table." The crowd erupted in applause. Not performative. Not polite. But earned. Back in D.C., the hearing had already been added to political science lectures. Young lawmakers referenced it. Analysts called it a blueprint for future generations of elected officials, especially women of color, who are told to wait their turn. Tim Scott, though still holding his seat, now carried a new label in the media: the senator who underestimated Jasmine Crockett. But Crockett didn't focus on him anymore. Because this wasn't about proving a point. It was about building power from purpose. She met with grassroots coalitions. She elevated young leaders. She co-authored bipartisan amendments that shocked critics, and passed. And quietly, word began to spread. She's not just the future of the Democratic Party. She's the future of leadership. In a closing interview, a reporter asked her, "Congresswoman, do you see yourself running for higher office?" Crockett smiled. "I see myself running toward justice. Wherever that takes me, I'll be ready." The camera held on her face for a second longer than normal, as if even the lens needed to capture the weight of what was happening. Not a soundbite. Not a moment. A movement. Jasmine Crockett didn't just survive the spotlight. She turned it into a torch. And now, others were following the light.